Sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. For Avis, Merrin, and Thora Quade, two widows in their early 60s, that chance came in the form of an abandoned castle deep in the Appalachian mountains. They bought it with their pensions after losing their husbands in the same bitter winter. The old stone fortress had been empty for years. It once belonged to a French family who disappeared without explanation. People said it was cursed. Avis and Thora just wanted a fresh start. They planned to turn it into a simple refuge for travelers. But when they discovered a hidden iron vault behind the fireplace, everything changed. Inside was something impossible, something connected to their own families. What secret had been buried there and why? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The friendship between Avis Merrin and Thora Quade had weathered 40 years of life's ordinary storms. They'd raised children in neighboring houses on Maple Street, shared coffee on countless Wednesday mornings, and attended each other's family gatherings with the comfortable ease of women who'd stopped keeping track of favors owed. Their husbands had been friends too, in that quiet way men have of standing together at backyard barbecues, talking about weather and lawn equipment while their wives did the real work of maintaining connection. Then came the winter that changed everything. Harold Merrin went first. A heart attack in his woodshop on a grey December afternoon. Avis found him there among the sawdust and half-finished birdhouses, his hand still resting on a piece of cherry wood he'd been sanding. She'd called Thora before she called anyone else, and Thora had driven over in her nightgown and winter coat, holding Avis while the ambulance crew loaded Harold onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. 6 weeks later, David Quade followed. Pneumonia that turned serious too fast, his lungs giving up after 63 years of reliable service. This time, it was Avis who sat in the hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning, who held Thora's hand when the doctor came out with that particular look on his face that means there's nothing more to be said. The months that followed blurred together in a fog of casseroles and sympathy cards, estate lawyers and insurance claims, the strange business of sorting through a shared lifetime and deciding what to keep and what to let go. They'd both done their grieving properly, or as properly as anyone can. They'd cried at appropriate times and maintained composure at others. They'd thanked people for their kindness and assured everyone they were managing just fine. But by the time spring arrived, something had shifted between them. They sat together one April morning in Avis's kitchen, drinking coffee that had gone cold. And Thora said what they'd both been thinking. "I can't stay here." Avis had looked up from her cup, seeing her own restlessness reflected in her friend's eyes. "Neither can I." The town of Millbrook had been home for most of their adult lives, but home had become a collection of memories they weren't ready to live inside anymore. Every corner held ghosts. The hardware store where Harold had bought his tools. The church, where David had served as deacon for 20 years. The pharmacy, where they'd both picked up prescriptions. The grocery store, where they'd run into neighbors who asked how they were holding up, with that concerned tilt of the head that made them both want to scream. They weren't holding up. They were holding on, which was different. "I've been looking at property listings," Thora admitted, pulling out her phone with a sheepish expression. "I know it's probably foolish, but I keep thinking there's somewhere else we could be. Somewhere without all this weight." Avis had reached for the phone, scrolling through the images of cottages and small houses, feeling nothing until she came to a listing that made her stop. It was a photograph of a castle, an actual stone castle, though calling it that felt almost generous. The structure rose 3 stories against a backdrop of dense pine forest, its grey stone walls covered in ivy, windows dark and empty as lost years. The listing described it as historic property in need of restoration, with significant acreage and original 19th century construction. The price was absurdly low, which should have been their first warning. "It's in North Carolina," Avis said, reading the details. "About 4 hours from here. Built in 1887 by a French immigrant family named Archambault. Been empty since 1952. She looked up at Thora. "This is crazy." "Show me," Thora said. And they'd leaned over the phone together. examining every photograph like women who'd already made a decision but needed to convince themselves they hadn't. 3 weeks later, they'd driven down to see it in person. The real estate agent, a tired-looking man named Dennis, who seemed personally offended by the castle's existence, had met them at the base of the long gravel drive. "I'm legally obligated to tell you about the structural concerns," he'd said, before they even got out of the car. "The roof needs work. The plumbing is original and mostly non-functional. There's no central heating, and the electrical system is a fire hazard. Also, there's some local history you should know about." "What kind of history?" Avis had asked. Dennis had shifted uncomfortably. "People say it's cursed. The Archambault family left suddenly, middle of the night, never came back. Since then, every person who's tried to do something with it has given up. Accidents, mostly. Strange ones." Thora had exchanged a glance with Avis. They'd both survived the kind of year that made curses seem like small concerns. "We'd like to see it anyway," Thora said. The drive up to the castle wound through old-growth pine forest. The trees so dense they blocked out most of the afternoon sun. When they'd finally emerged into the clearing where the castle stood, both women had fallen silent. It was magnificent in its decay. 3 stories of grey stone, with turrets on the corners, and tall windows that must have once gleamed with light. The grounds sprawled in all directions, overgrown with brambles and wildflowers, stone pathways disappearing into the weeds. There was a garden plot that had gone feral, an old well with a rusted bucket, and what looked like the remains of a greenhouse. "It's too much," Avis had whispered. "We couldn't possibly—" "We could," Thora interrupted. "Look at it, Avis. Really look at it." And Avis had looked, past the decay and the damage, past the practical impossibility of 2 women in their 60s taking on such a project. She'd seen something else, possibility, a blank slate, a place where they could build something new instead of maintaining something old. They'd made an offer that same day. Dennis had accepted it so quickly they knew they'd probably overpaid, despite the low price. But neither of them cared. They sold their houses in Millbrook, packed up 40 years of accumulated life, and moved into the castle on a bright June morning. The nearest town was Ridgemont, population 800, about 15 miles down the mountain. It consisted of a general store, a post office, a diner, a Methodist church, and a volunteer fire department. The people were polite but wary, the way small-town folks often are with outsiders, especially outsiders foolish enough to buy the cursed castle. Ruby Petrie ran the general store, a woman in her mid-30s, with her grandfather's sharp eyes and her own brand of straightforward kindness. She'd helped them load up on supplies that first day, offering advice about local contractors and warning them about which roads became impassable in winter. "My grandfather Leonard used to know the Archambault family," Ruby mentioned as she rang up their purchases. "He's the local historian, such as we have one. Keeps records of everything that's ever happened in these mountains. You should talk to him if you want to know more about your place." "Is he the one who'll tell us about the curse?" Avis asked with a slight smile. Ruby had returned the smile. "He's the one who'll tell you the truth, which is usually more interesting than any curse. He'll come around once you're settled. Can't resist new people to talk at." The first weeks in the castle had been an exercise in determined optimism. They'd set up camp in 2 adjacent rooms on the 2nd floor, the only ones with intact ceilings and floors solid enough to trust. They'd brought sleeping bags and camping equipment, approaching the whole endeavor like an adventure, because treating it as anything else would have been overwhelming. The castle was vast and empty and full of echoes. Their footsteps rang on stone floors. The wind whistled through gaps in the windows. At night, the building settled and creaked with sounds. That would have been unsettling if they'd been the type to unsettle easily, but they weren't. They'd both raised teenagers and buried husbands and managed households through decades of small crises and large ones. A drafty castle was just another problem to solve. They'd established a routine quickly. Mornings were for planning and assessing, making lists of what needed to be done and in what order. Afternoons were for actual work, clearing rooms, documenting damage, beginning the slow process of reclaiming the castle from nature's patient grip. Evenings were for sitting together in what they designated as the library, a second-floor room with built-in bookshelves and a fireplace that still worked, drinking tea and talking about their progress. It was in the library that Avis found the journal. She'd been examining the bookshelves, pulling out volumes to see what remained of what must have once been an impressive collection. Most of the books were damaged beyond reading, their pages swollen with moisture and eaten by insects. But wedged behind a row of ruined French novels, she found a leather-bound journal that had somehow survived intact. The leather was worn but supple, and when she opened it, the pages released a faint scent of old paper and dried lavender. The entries were in French, written in a precise feminine hand. "Thora," she'd called out, "come look at this." They'd sat together on the dusty floor, turning pages carefully, frustrated by their inability to read most of what was written. Avis had taken French in high school decades ago and could make out a few words here and there, dates ranging from 1890 to 1952, names she didn't recognize. References to les femmes and les enfants, the women and the children. One phrase appeared repeatedly, and Avis could translate it well enough. "Ce qui doit être protégé," what must be protected. "We should get this translated," Thora said. "It might tell us about the family, about why they left, or about the curse," Avis added with a slight smile. Though she wasn't entirely joking. They'd brought the journal down to their evening routine in the library, treating it like a treasure even though they couldn't read it. There was something compelling about the careful handwriting, the way certain passages were underlined for emphasis, the occasional pressed flower tucked between pages. Someone had cared deeply about this record. Someone had believed it was important enough to preserve. By the end of their first month, they'd made real progress. The second floor was mostly habitable. They'd hired a local contractor to assess the roof and give them an honest evaluation of what could be saved versus what needed to be replaced. The plumbing was being addressed slowly. The electrical system was being brought up to code even more slowly. Their dream was taking shape. They would turn the castle into a hiker's refuge. The Appalachian Trail passed within 5 miles of the property, and there was nothing else in the area offering accommodation. They'd provide simple rooms, hot meals, and a place to rest for people making the long journey through the mountains. They'd call it Second Wind Lodge. It felt right somehow. A place of refuge for people on a journey. A place where travelers could find rest and restoration. Before continuing on their way, neither of them had any idea how literally appropriate that name would turn out to be. Leonard Petrie came to visit on a humid afternoon in late July. He was in his mid-70s, lean and weathered, with the kind of sharp intelligence that age had refined rather than dimmed. He brought with him a folder of papers and photographs, his personal archive of the castle's history. They'd sat together in the library. The room was beginning to feel like the castle's heart, and Leonard had spread out his materials on the floor. The Archambaults, he began, were Huguenots originally, French Protestants who faced persecution in France. They came to America in the 1880s, looking for somewhere remote where they could live in peace. Edouard Archambault built this castle for his wife, Marguerite. She was the real force in the family by all accounts. He showed them photographs from the 1890s and early 1900s, formal portraits of stern-faced people in period dress, images of the castle in its prime, with manicured gardens and elegant stonework. They were intensely private, Leonard continued. Rarely came into town, kept to themselves up here in the mountains. But they were also known for their kindness. During the Depression, they helped a lot of local families. During the Second World War, they took in displaced persons, helped them get settled. What happened in 1952? Avis asked. Leonard's expression had grown thoughtful. That's the mystery. One day in August, they were here. The next day, gone. Middle of the night, according to the few people who noticed. Left everything behind, furniture, belongings, everything. No note, no explanation. The property went into some kind of legal limbo. No heirs came forward to claim it. Eventually it was sold for taxes, changed hands a few times, but nobody ever stayed. Because of the curse? Thora asked. Leonard smiled. People need explanations for things they don't understand. The Archambolts leave mysteriously, so it must be a curse. Truth is probably simpler, but I'll admit the timing was odd. That same month, several other families in the area also left suddenly. All of them had some connection to the castle. He'd pulled out a document, yellowed with age. This is from the county clerk's records. Property transfers from 1952. You can see the Archambolt name here. And then a series of quick sales and purchases over the next few years. Avis had leaned forward to study the document, and that's when she saw it. A name in the margin, written in pencil. Merrin, guardian duties transferred, her grandmother's maiden name. She'd looked up at Thora, whose face had gone pale. Thora was pointing at another notation. Quade, secondary custodian, Thora's mother's name. Leonard had noticed their reaction. You recognize those names? They're our names, Avis said slowly. Our family names. The three of them had sat in silence for a moment, the implication hanging in the air like dust motes in the afternoon light. That's quite a coincidence, Leonard finally said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe in coincidences any more than they did after Leonard left. Avis and Thora had sat together in the library as evening fell around them. The journal lay on the floor between them, its French phrases suddenly feeling less like historical curiosity and more like personal message. What must be protected? Avis translated again, running her finger over the words. Why would our families be mentioned in documents about this place? Thora asked. We've never heard any stories about it. Our parents never mentioned anything. My grandmother disappeared when I was 6, Avis said quietly. Just gone one day. My mother never talked about it. Said she'd had a breakdown and went away to get help, but nobody ever saw her again. Thora turned to look at her. My mother never spoke about her childhood, not ever. We asked when we were kids, but she'd just say it was too painful to remember and change the subject. They'd both fallen silent again, thinking about the mysteries in their own families that they'd always accepted as simply the way things were. The gaps in family trees, the stories that stopped abruptly at certain points, the photographs that were never displayed. We need to get this journal translated, Avis said finally. All of it. And we need to find out what our families had to do with this place. Neither of them could have known that the answer was waiting for them, sealed behind iron and stone in a vault they hadn't yet discovered. 3 weeks after Leonard's visit, Avis and Thora had settled into the rhythm of restoration with the patience of women who understood that worthwhile things take time. The castle was slowly revealing itself to them, room by room, like a story being told in careful increments. They'd learned which floorboards could be trusted and which couldn't, where the roof leaked when it rained, and how the building held heat in its stone walls, even on the coolest mornings. The West Wing had been their latest project. It consisted of 4 large rooms on each floor, once grand, but now in various states of decay. They'd been working their way through the 2nd floor, clearing out debris and assessing what could be salvaged. When they decided to tackle the largest room, what must have been a sitting room or parlor, judging by the size and the elaborate fireplace that dominated one wall. The fireplace was a work of art. Grey stone carved with intricate patterns, a mantle of dark wood that had somehow survived the years intact, and a hearth deep enough to roast a pig. Avis had been examining the chimney, worried about structural integrity, when Thora noticed something odd about the stonework. Come look at this, Thora called, running her hand along the interior wall of the fireplace. Does this feel strange to you? Avis knelt beside her, pressing her palms against the stone. There was a subtle difference in texture, a barely perceptible gap in the mortar. It's like there's a seam here. They'd spent the next hour carefully examining every stone, mapping the pattern of what they were increasingly certain was a hidden panel. The work required patience and methodical attention, but they'd both spent decades as teachers and nurses, professions that taught you to notice small details and trust your observations. By late afternoon, They'd identified a section of the fireplace wall that was clearly separate from the rest, though cunningly disguised. The stones were fitted so precisely that only careful examination revealed the edges. "Should we try to open it?" Avis asked. "We own the place," Thora replied. "Whatever's behind there belongs to us now." It took another 2 hours of careful prying with various tools before they managed to shift the panel. It moved suddenly, swinging inward on hinges that shrieked with disuse, revealing a space behind the fireplace, about 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall. And there, embedded in the back wall, was the vault. It was smaller than a bank vault, but larger than a safe, constructed of iron that had oxidized to a deep brown color with patches of rust. The surface was covered in engravings, elaborate scrollwork, symbols they didn't recognize, and words in French that ran along the top edge like a benediction or a warning. Thora pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the vault's surface. "Those symbols," she said, moving closer. "They look religious. Maybe Protestant." Avis was examining the locking mechanism, or rather, the lack of one. There was no visible keyhole, no combination dial, nothing that obviously indicated how to open it. Just a circular medallion in the center, about 6 inches in diameter, with concentric rings that might rotate. "We need to get Leonard up here," Avis said. "He mentioned Huguenot symbols earlier. Maybe he can tell us what these mean." They'd called him immediately, and Leonard arrived within the hour, bringing with him a battery-powered lantern and a magnifying glass. His reaction to the vault was a mixture of academic excitement and something that looked almost like apprehension. "I've heard stories about Huguenot families hiding valuables this way," he said, examining the engravings carefully. "During the persecutions in France, they developed elaborate security systems to protect important documents and assets. But I've never actually seen one." He translated some of the French inscriptions. "This one says, 'Guard the innocent.' This one, 'What is sealed in faith remains so.' And this larger one along the top, 'May those who seek truth find courage, and may courage preserve truth.' That's not about hiding money," Thora observed. "No," Leonard agreed. "This is about protecting something or someone." He spent another 20 minutes examining the vault from every angle, taking photographs and making notes in a small leather journal of his own. Finally, he sat back on his heels with a thoughtful expression. "The Archambaults weren't just wealthy recluses," he said slowly. "There were always rumors, whispers really, that they helped people who needed to disappear. Women in trouble, refugees, people fleeing danger. Nothing was ever proven, but the timing of various arrivals and departures was suggestive. Like a safe house?" Avis asked. "More than that. Like a complete reset. New identities, new lives. The kind of thing that would require extensive documentation and absolute secrecy." They all looked at the vault again, understanding settling over them like a weight. "If that's what this is," Thora said quietly, "then our family's names being in those property records means something very specific." Leonard nodded. "It means they were part of it. Whatever the Archambaults were doing, your grandmothers or mothers were involved." Avis felt something shift inside her, a piece of family history clicking into place. Her grandmother's disappearance suddenly felt less like abandonment and more like something else. "Something purposeful. We need to open it," she said. "There's no visible lock," Leonard pointed out, "and I wouldn't recommend forcing it. Even this old can be brittle, and if there are documents inside, you could damage them. Then we figure out how it opens," Thora said, with the determination of a woman who'd spent her career solving problems. "There's always a mechanism. We just have to find it." Leonard took more photographs and measurements, promising to research Huguenot vault designs. After he left, Avis and Thora sat in front of the open panel, staring at the vault as twilight deepened outside the windows. "This changes everything," Avis said. "We came here looking for a fresh start, and instead we've found what? Our past. Maybe both," Thora replied. She reached out and touched the vault's surface, her fingers tracing the engraved words. "My mother was 19 when she had me. Nobody ever talked about my father. She never married, worked 3 jobs to raise me alone, and never once complained. But she also never explained. And my grandmother, Avis added, she was a midwife, traveled all over these mountains, helping women give birth. Then one day she didn't come home, and nobody knew where she'd gone. They sat in silence, both understanding that they'd crossed a threshold. The castle wasn't just a building anymore. It was a mystery that involved them personally, that reached back into their families' histories and forward into whatever they decided to do next. The next morning, Ruby stopped by with supplies and news. She'd mentioned their discovery to a few people in town, small towns being what they are, and word had spread. Most people were fascinated, a few were nervous, and one person in particular had shown immediate and intense interest. "There's a man asking questions," Ruby said as she helped them unload groceries. "Came into the store yesterday. Foreign accent, French maybe. Asked about the castle, about who owned it now, about whether anything unusual had been found. Did he give a name?" Avis asked. "Antoine Archambault," Ruby replied. "Said he's a descendant of the family, that he's been researching his heritage." Avis and Thora exchanged glances. "That's convenient timing," Thora said. "That's what I thought," Ruby agreed. "I didn't tell him anything specific, just that 2 ladies from Virginia had bought the place and were fixing it up. But he seemed very interested in whether you'd found any family papers or documents." After Ruby left, the 2 women stood in the library, looking at each other with a shared understanding. "He knows about the vault," Avis said, "or at least he knows there's something here worth finding," Thora agreed. "The question is, do we tell him?" "Not until we know what's inside," Avis decided, "and not until we understand what our own families had to do with all of this." They spent the rest of that day examining the vault more carefully, looking for any clue about how to open it. The circular medallion in the center seemed to be the key, but they couldn't determine what made it turn or unlock. They tried pressing it, rotating it, pulling it. Nothing worked. It was Thora who finally noticed the faint scratches near the bottom edge of the vault. They were so light they were almost invisible, worn away by time and oxidation. But when she shone her phone's light at just the right angle, letters appeared. "Quade," she read, her voice barely above a whisper. Avis moved closer, examining the area around the scratches. About 6 inches to the right, she found another set of marks. Merrin, their names, or their families' names, scratched into the iron, like messages from the past. "They were here," Avis said, feeling tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "Our grandmothers or mothers, they stood right here. They knew about this vault. They put our names on it," Thora added, her own voice thick with emotion. "Why would they do that unless they meant for us to find it," Avis finished. They stood together in the dim light of the West Wing. 2 women in their 60s who'd thought they were buying a building but had actually bought a mystery. A mystery that reached back through decades of silence and secrets, that connected them to women they'd never fully known, that promised answers to questions they'd learned not to ask. The vault remained closed, but something had opened between them, a shared purpose that went beyond restoring a building or starting a business. They were going to find out what was hidden here. They were going to understand what their families had been part of. And they were going to protect it, whatever it was, the way it seemed their grandmothers had protected them. Outside, the sun was setting behind the pine-covered mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The castle stood solid and patient, keeping its secrets for a little while longer. But not much longer. Avis and Thora had spent their lives being patient, being proper, being what other people expected them to be. Now they were going to be investigators, and they weren't going to stop until they had the truth. The following morning found Avis at the Ridgemont County Courthouse, a squat brick building that housed both government offices and the county archives. The clerk, a woman named Patricia who looked to be in her 40s, had been helpful once Avis explained what she was looking for. "Property records from the 1940s and 50s are in the basement," Patricia said, leading her down a narrow staircase. "We've digitized most of the newer stuff, but that era is still paper." Fair warning, the organizational system is creative at best. The basement was exactly what Avis had expected. Concrete floors, metal shelves, and the musty smell of old paper. But it was surprisingly well lit, and Patricia had provided her with a table, a comfortable chair, and a promise to bring coffee. Avis started with the property records Leonard had mentioned, working backward from 1952. The Archambault name appeared frequently in the early records, purchases of surrounding land, tax payments, improvements filed with the county. Then in August of 1952, everything changed. A hasty sale, transferred to a holding company, then resold within weeks. But it was the associated files that caught her attention. Tucked into a folder marked Estate Settlements Archambault were papers that seemed out of place. Not legal documents, but personal ones, letters, receipts, and photographs that had somehow ended up in the official records. She pulled out a photograph, and her breath caught. 3 people stood in front of the castle, the building looking pristine in what must have been late spring or early summer, given the flowering bushes visible in the background. 2 young women, probably in their early 20s, flanked a man in his 50s who wore a formal suit. The man had a stern but not unkind face. One of the women had dark hair pulled back in a style from the 1950s, her expression serious. The other was blonde, smiling slightly, one hand raised as if she'd been caught mid-gesture. Avis knew that gesture. She'd seen it in old home movies, in the few photographs her mother had kept. Her grandmother Claire had always gestured exactly that way when she talked, her hand rising as if conducting invisible music. She turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink, C. Merrin, J. Quade, A. Archambault, May 1951. C. Merrin, Claire Merrin. Her grandmother, J. Quade. That had to be Josephine, Thora's mother. They'd been here together at the castle. A full decade before they supposedly even knew each other. Before they'd raised their daughters in neighboring towns. Before they'd become the women who would raise Avis and Thora. Avis's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and photographed the picture. Then she went through the rest of the folder systematically, photographing every document. There were receipts from a medical supply company in Charlotte, letters postmarked from various locations across the South. A list of names, dozens of them, with notations beside each one. Cincinnati, successful. New Orleans, settled. Boston, monitoring. It looked like a ledger of some kind, tracking people and outcomes. At the bottom of the folder, she found a newspaper clipping from the Ridgemont Weekly, dated September 1952. The headline read, "Local residents depart suddenly." The brief article mentioned several families who had relocated for employment opportunities, including a reference to 2 women associated with the Archambault estate who left without forwarding addresses. Meanwhile, Thora was having her own revelations. She'd decided to call her Aunt Ellen, her mother's only surviving sibling, who lived in a retirement community in Virginia. Ellen was 82, and her memory could be uncertain, but she'd always been fond of Thora. The conversation had started pleasantly enough, catching up on family news. But when Thora mentioned she'd bought property in North Carolina, Ellen's tone had changed. Where in North Carolina? She'd asked sharply. The mountains, near a town called Ridgemont. Silence on the other end of the line, long enough that Thora thought they'd been disconnected. Aunt Ellen, your mother made me promise never to talk about that place, Ellen finally said, her voice small and old. She said it was too dangerous, that some things needed to stay buried. What things? Thora asked gently. I found something here, Aunt Ellen, something that has our family name on it. I need to understand. Another long pause, filled with the sound of Ellen breathing and what might have been quiet crying. She was pregnant, Ellen said finally. 19 years old and pregnant, and our father was so angry he wouldn't speak to her. This was 1951, different times. Unwed mothers were sent away, you understand? To hide the shame. Where was she sent? To a place in the mountains. A refuge, they called it, run by a French family. They took in girls like Josephine, helped them through the pregnancy, and then, Ellen's voice broke. Then they arranged adoptions. That's what was supposed to happen. Thora's heart was pounding. But that's not what happened. She came back without the baby. Wouldn't talk about it. Wouldn't say if it was a boy or girl. Wouldn't say what happened. Just said the baby was being protected, and that was all anyone needed to know. 6 months later, she moved to Millbrook and took a job at the hospital. 2 years after that, she came home for Christmas with you. A toddler. Said she'd adopted you from an agency in North Carolina. But you didn't believe her, Thora said. I believed you were hers, Ellen replied. You look just like her, still do. But the story never made sense. Single women couldn't adopt in those days. And she was so young, barely making ends meet. How could she afford an adoption? Why would an agency let her? You think I was the baby she had at the refuge? I don't think it, honey. I know it. But she made me promise never to tell you. Said it was safer if you never knew. And after what happened to that other woman, I understood why. What other woman? The midwife who worked at the refuge. Claire something. She disappeared. Must have been around 1956 or so. Josephine heard about it and didn't speak for 3 days. Just sat in her room, wouldn't eat. When she finally came out, she made me swear on our mother's grave that I'd never mention the refuge to anyone. Said people who knew too much ended up gone. After the call ended, Thora sat in her car, in the castle's overgrown driveway, trying to process what she'd learned. Her mother hadn't adopted her. She'd given birth to her, and then pretended she hadn't, creating an elaborate story to protect what? Thora herself. The refuge? Some larger secret? And Claire Merrin, Avis's grandmother, had disappeared. Not because of a breakdown, but because of something connected to the refuge. When Avis returned from the courthouse that afternoon, she found Thora sitting on the castle's front steps, looking small and lost in a way Avis had rarely seen. What happened? Avis asked, sitting beside her. Thora told her everything Ellen had said. Avis listened without interrupting, then pulled out her phone and showed Thora the photograph. That's my mother, Thora said, pointing to the blonde woman. I've only seen a few pictures of her from that age. But that's definitely her. And that's my grandmother, Avis confirmed. They sat together in the warm afternoon sun. 2 women who'd thought they'd left their past behind in Millbrook, only to discover their past had been waiting for them here all along. We weren't just friends growing up in neighboring houses, Thora said quietly. Our mothers orchestrated that, didn't they? They chose to live near each other, to raise us together, because we were connected from the beginning, Avis agreed. Born at the refuge, raised by women who worked there. She paused, a new thought occurring. Thora, what if we weren't just born there? What if we were the babies, Thora finished. The ones they were supposed to give up for adoption, but they kept us instead. It felt true the moment the words were spoken. It explained the secrecy, the gaps in their family histories. The way both mothers had been fiercely protective but also somehow watchful, as if they were guarding against some unnamed threat. The vault, Avis said. If that's what this is about, if the refuge was helping women escape bad situations and our mothers helped them, then the vault might contain proof, records of who we really are, who our biological parents were. Do we want to know that? Thora asked. It was the question neither of them had been willing to voice until now. They'd both built their identities on the foundation their mothers had provided. Learning that foundation was constructed of loving lies was one thing. Learning what truth lay beneath it was another. I think we need to know, Avis said finally. Not just for us, but for them. Your mothers protected us for some reason. Your grandmother disappeared because of this. We owe it to them to understand what they sacrificed. Thora nodded slowly. Then we keep looking. We find out how to open that vault. That evening, Ruby stopped by with dinner, a casserole from her grandmother, and news from town. Antoine Archambault was still asking questions, this time at the diner, offering to buy information about the castle's contents. Nobody's telling him anything, Ruby assured them. But he's persistent, and he seems to have money to throw around. What exactly is he asking about? Avis inquired. Family papers, records, specifically anything related to people who stayed at the castle in the 1940s and 50s. He claims he's researching his family tree, but, Ruby shrugged, it feels like more than genealogy to me. After Ruby left, Avis and Thora returned to the West Wing, to the vault that held answers to questions they were just beginning to understand how to ask. They'd brought more powerful lights this time, and they examined every inch of the iron surface. "Look at this," Thora said, pointing to a series of small indentations along the circular medallion's edge. "These aren't decorative. They're too precise." Avis traced them with her finger. "They're markers, like positions on a clock. Or a combination," Thora added. "Not numbers, but positions. We might need something that fits into these indentations." "A key," Avis said, "but not a regular key. Something shaped specifically for this mechanism." They both thought about the scratched names on the vault's surface. If their mothers had put those names there, had they also hidden something that would help open it? A key waiting to be found somewhere in the castle or in their own family histories? The castle seemed to hold its breath around them, waiting to see if they were clever enough and brave enough to uncover its secrets. The discovery happened 3 days later, during what had become an almost meditative process of exploring the castle room by room. Avis had taken the attic while Thora worked through the cellars, both of them searching for anything that might unlock the vault or explain their connection to this place. The attic was a maze of forgotten things: trunks of moth-eaten clothes, boxes of cracked dishes, furniture too damaged to be worth saving, but apparently too good to throw away decades ago. Dust lay thick over everything, disturbed only by the tracks of mice and the occasional bird that had found its way in through gaps in the roof. Avis was about to give up for the day when she noticed a wardrobe in the corner, half hidden behind a broken dresser. Unlike the other furniture, this piece had been covered with a sheet that had protected it from the worst of the decay. When she pulled the sheet away, dust billowed up in a cloud that made her cough. But the wardrobe itself was in remarkably good condition. Inside hung several coats, all women's styles from the 1940s and 50s, wool and heavy cotton, the kind of practical garments mountain women would have worn. She was about to close the door when something made her look more carefully at one particular coat, charcoal grey wool with large buttons and deep pockets. She pulled it out and examined it in the better light. Near the attic window, the coat was well made, expensive for its time, and there, on the inner label, were initials embroidered in careful stitching: C.M. Claire Merrin. Her grandmother's coat. Avis's hands shook as she went through the pockets. Empty, all of them. But the coat felt oddly weighted on one side, as if something heavy was sewn into the lining. She ran her fingers along the interior seam and felt it, something hard and angular, hidden in the fabric. She pulled out her pocket knife and carefully picked at the stitches. They were different from the original seams, clearly added later with the deliberate purpose of concealment. It took several minutes of careful work before she could slip her hand inside and pull out what had been hidden there. A brass key, tarnished with age, but still solid. Its design was unlike any key she'd seen before. The shaft was thick, and the teeth had an unusual pattern, almost like waves rather than the typical notches. She turned it over in her palm, feeling the weight of it, the significance. Her grandmother had hidden this key in her coat and left the coat in this attic. Not lost, left, deliberately placed where someone who knew to look might eventually find it. Avis ran down the 3 flights of stairs so fast she was breathless. When she reached the cellar where Thora was working, "I found it," she gasped, holding up the key. "In my grandmother's coat. She left it for us." They practically ran to the West Wing, their excitement making them careless on the uneven floors. In the dim light filtering through the dirty windows, they knelt before the vault like supplicants before an altar. Avis tried to fit the key into the circular medallion, but there was no obvious keyhole. She tried the indentations they'd noticed before. Nothing. She tried pressing the key against various points on the vault's surface with increasing frustration. "It has to work," she said. "Why else would it have been hidden like that? Unless it's not the only key we need," Thora said slowly. "You saw those indentations. What if this vault requires multiple keys? A security system designed so no single person could open it alone." Avis sat back on her heels, disappointment washing over her. "So we're still missing pieces, but we have one piece now. That's progress. They decided to call Leonard, who arrived within the hour with several books about historical lock mechanisms and vault designs. He examined the key carefully, taking measurements and photographs. "This is definitely custom-made," he said. "The brass has a particular composition. You can tell by the color and weight. And these teeth patterns are consistent with French locksmith work from the late 19th century. So it does go to this vault," Avis said. "Almost certainly. But Thora's right. This looks like a multi-lock system." The Huguenots were particularly paranoid about security, given their history of persecution. They often designed vaults that required 2 or even 3 keys, held by different trusted individuals. So no one person could access the contents alone, meaning there's at least one more key somewhere, Thora said. "At least," Leonard agreed. "Though I'd wager on 2 keys total. 3 would be excessive for a private estate vault." After Leonard left, promising to research more about Huguenot security systems, Avis and Thora sat in the library with the key between them on the table. The brass caught the lamplight, gleaming with possibility and frustration in equal measure. "If my grandmother left one key," Avis said, "maybe your mother left the other. But where? She's been dead for 10 years. Everything she owned was either given away or thrown out when we cleared her house." "Not everything," Avis said quietly. "What about her personal effects? Things you kept?" Thora's expression shifted. "There's a box. Just small things, her nursing pins, some jewelry, her address book. I brought it with me when we moved. I couldn't leave it behind. The box was in Thora's room, tucked in the bottom of her closet. A simple wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with a small brass latch. They'd seen it 100 times over the years, but neither of them had ever examined it with the kind of focused attention they brought to it now. Inside were the expected items: nursing pins from various hospitals, a string of pearls, a watch that no longer worked, an address book with entries in Thora's mother's careful handwriting. But at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of silk that might once have been part of a scarf, was something else, another key. Silver rather than brass, but with the same unusual tooth pattern, the same substantial weight. "Oh my God," Thora whispered. They held the 2 keys side by side, different metals, but clearly made as a pair. The teeth patterns complemented each other, like puzzle pieces designed to fit together. But before they could rush back to try them on the vault, Avis noticed something else in the box. A sealed envelope tucked into the address book's back cover, so flat and yellowed it had almost become part of the book itself. "Did you know this was here?" Avis asked. Thora shook her head. "I never looked through the address book. I just kept it because it was hers. The envelope was addressed in Josephine Quade's handwriting, to the Daughters of the Covenant." They stared at it for a long moment before Thora carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting elegant, despite the visible tremor that suggested it had been written by an elderly person or someone under great stress. "My dearest girls," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've found your way to the refuge and to each other. I pray that means you're both safe, both grown, both free to seek the truth that Josephine and I spent our lives protecting. We were so young when we came to this place. I was 22, she was 19. We came as midwives, hired by Marguerite Archambault to help women who had nowhere else to turn. Women fleeing violence, women carrying children that powerful men wanted to claim, women whose very existence was inconvenient to people with money and influence. The refuge was more than shelter. It was a complete transformation. Marguerite created new identities, new histories, new lives. She had connections across the country, people who would take in a woman and her child, give them work, protect them from those who hunted them. In May of 1951, 2 young women came to us within days of each other. Both were pregnant, both were running from men who saw them as possessions rather than people. Both gave birth that terrible week, and both died, bringing their daughters into the world. You were those daughters. Avis, your birth mother was named Anne. She died 3 hours after you were born, her body simply giving up after the trauma it had endured. Thora, your mother was Elizabeth. She survived the birth, but hemorrhaged through the night. We couldn't save her. The men who fathered you were brothers, Jacques and Philippe Archambault, distant cousins of Marguerite who had come to America fleeing their own demons. They were involved in things I still don't fully understand. Dangerous things. Criminal things. They'd gotten these women pregnant as leverage, planning to use the children to force their mothers' families into something. Business arrangements? Silence about their activities? Marguerite never told us all of it. What she did tell us was that those men could never know you existed. That if they found you, they would use you the same way they'd tried to use your mothers. So Josephine and I made a choice. We each took one of you. We created false birth records, false adoption papers. We left the refuge and went to different towns, far enough apart that no one would connect us, but close enough that we could watch over each other. We raised you as our own because you became our own. Every moment of fear was worth it. Every lie we told was told in love. The vault contains the full records of the refuge. Every woman helped, every child saved, every identity created. It also contains evidence of what the Archambault brothers were doing, evidence Marguerite gathered as insurance, to keep them from ever coming after the refuge or the people it protected. If you're reading this, it means the brothers or their descendants have come seeking that evidence. They will destroy it if they can, and they will destroy anyone who knows about it. Open the vault. Document everything. Protect it as we protected you. But know this. Once you open it, once you see the truth, your lives will change. The women you thought you were will become shadows, and the women you actually are will step into the light. Be brave, my darlings. You come from women who chose love over safety, who chose truth over comfort. You come from Josephine and me, yes, but you also come from Anne and Elizabeth, women who gave their lives so you could have yours. The vault requires both keys. Turn simultaneously. It will only open for two people working together, just as Josephine and I work together to protect you. Trust each other. Trust the refuge. Trust that some secrets are worth keeping and some truths are worth revealing. With all my love, even from beyond the grave. Claire Merrin, written January 15th, 1996. The letter fell from Avis's trembling hands. Neither woman spoke for several minutes, both trying to absorb the weight of what they'd just learned. We're not who we thought we were, Thora finally said, her voice barely audible. No, Avis agreed. We're not. Our mothers weren't our mothers. They were our mothers in every way that mattered, Avis said firmly. They chose us. They protected us. They loved us enough to build their entire lives around keeping us safe. But our real mothers died giving us life, Avis interrupted gently. Anne and Elizabeth, we should know their names. We should honor them too. They sat together in silence, processing grief for women they'd never known, and gratitude for women who'd sacrificed everything to become the mothers they'd needed. A knock on the castle's front door startled them both. It was late afternoon, and they weren't expecting anyone. When they opened the door, they found a man in his mid-50s, well-dressed in expensive casual clothes, with dark hair graying at the temples and the kind of confident posture that suggested someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Good afternoon," he said in accented English. "My name is Antoine Archambault. I believe we need to talk about this property and certain items that belong to my family." Avis and Thora stood in the doorway, neither moving to let Antoine Archambault inside. He seemed to expect resistance because his expression remained pleasant, even charming, though his eyes held the sharpness of someone assessing an opponent. "I don't mean to intrude," he continued smoothly, "but I've recently learned that certain family archives may still be on this property. As a direct descendant of Edouard Archambault, I have both a legal and personal interest in recovering any documents related to my family's history. This is our property now," Thora said evenly. "Legally purchased. Whatever is here belongs to us." Antoine's smile tightened slightly. Of course. I'm not disputing your ownership of the building itself. But family papers, historical records, these are different matters under heritage law. I'm prepared to offer fair compensation for anything you found. Or we could arrange for proper archival preservation at a museum. We haven't found anything, Avis said, the lie coming easily because she could feel the 2 keys in her pocket. Heavy with significance. Nothing at all? Antoine's tone suggested polite disbelief. In a castle that's been sealed for 60 years. Come now, ladies. I'm a reasonable man. I'm offering you a simple business transaction. Name your price. There is no price, Thora said. And I think you should leave. Something flickered across Antoine's face. Annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. I understand you may need time to consider. But I should mention that I've consulted with attorneys who specialize in estate law. There are complications with the original sale of this property. Questions about whether the Archambault estate was properly settled. If those questions were pursued legally, it could create significant difficulties for you. Are you threatening us? Avis asked quietly. Not at all. Simply informing you of facts you should know as the current owners. I'll leave my card. He produced an elegant business card from his pocket and held it out. When neither woman took it, he placed it carefully on the doorframe. Think about it. I'm staying at the inn in Ridgemont for the next few days. I hope we can reach an understanding. He walked back to his car, an expensive sedan that looked out of place on the rutted drive, and left without looking back. They closed the door and stood in the hallway, both understanding that the game had changed. Antoine wasn't just curious. He was determined, and he had resources they didn't. Lawyers, money, time. He knows about the vault, Thora said. Of course he does. The question is, how much does he know about what's in it? Leonard arrived an hour later, summoned by a concerned phone call. They told him about Antoine's visit, about the veiled threats and the mention of legal complications. He's not wrong about the estate issues, Leonard said reluctantly. I've been researching since you found the vault. The Archambault property transfer in 1952 was unusual. Very quick, very quiet. There were no heirs who came forward at the time, but that doesn't mean heirs don't exist. If Antoine can prove direct descent, he might have a claim. Not to the property necessarily, but to anything considered family papers or heirlooms. What exactly constitutes family papers? Avis asked. That's the gray area. Personal letters, definitely. Financial records, probably. But something like the refuge records, documentation of illegal activity, evidence that could damage living people, that's trickier. There's an argument that it's historical documentation that belongs in public archives, protected by heritage laws. Could he actually take the castle from us? Thora asked. Leonard hesitated. Probably not. But he could tie you up in court for years, and if he can prove the original sale was improper, he might be able to force you to surrender anything found on the property pending legal resolution. After Leonard left, Avis and Thora made a decision. They would open the vault tonight, document everything inside as quickly as possible, and secure the most important materials before Antoine could interfere. If he wanted a legal battle, they'd give him one, but not before they understood exactly what they were fighting to protect. They spent the afternoon preparing. Ruby brought them a high-quality camera and extra batteries. Leonard returned with archival gloves and acid-free boxes for storing documents. Neither asked directly what was being planned, but both understood they were being made accomplices in something that felt more like a heist than simple property ownership. As evening fell, Avis and Thora stood before the vault with both keys in hand. The brass key went into Avis's right hand, the silver into Thora's left. They'd spent an hour examining the vault's mechanism, finally understanding how the 2 keys worked together. The indentations Thora had noticed formed 2 separate circular tracks on the medallion. Each key had to be inserted into specific points, which they'd determined by careful measurement and trial, and then both had to be turned simultaneously in opposite directions. Ready? Avis asked. Ready, Thora confirmed. They inserted the keys and began to turn. For a horrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that spoke of decades without movement, something inside the vault shifted. They felt resistance, then a click, then a series of smaller clicks as internal mechanisms released. The circular medallion began to rotate on its own, and they stepped back, watching as the vault door, sealed for more than 60 years, swung slowly open. The interior was dark and smelled of metal and old paper. They shone their flashlights inside, revealing wooden shelves lined with leather-bound books, metal file boxes, and a small wooden chest on the bottom shelf. "Oh my God," Thora whispered. They worked carefully, reverently, removing items one at a time. The largest book was clearly the central record, a massive leather-bound ledger with the Archambault Refuge, 1947-1961 embossed on the cover. Avis opened it with gloved hands, turning to the first page. The handwriting was the same elegant script from the journal they'd found in the library, Marguerite Archambault's hand. "This book contains the true names and stories of those who sought shelter," the inscription read. "May their courage be remembered. May their dignity be honored. May the truth stand as witness to what was endured and overcome." They turned pages slowly, each entry a story. Names, dates, circumstances. Marguerite had recorded not just facts, but humanity. This brave soul arrived with 2 children and nothing but fear. "We gave her hope and a new name. She is now safe in Cincinnati, working as a seamstress, her children healthy and educated. 3 months helping this family relocate after violence destroyed their home. The father died protecting them. The mother carries that weight, but also carries forward. They are settled in New Orleans, and the children write to tell us they are thriving." On and on, dozens of entries. Some brief, some detailed, all written with compassion and fierce protectiveness. Then they found their mother's entries, and both women had to sit down. Claire Merrin and Josephine Quade. May 1951. 2 young women arrived in desperate circumstances. N.M. and Elizabeth R., both pregnant, both fleeing the Archambault brothers, and died in childbirth. May 14. Elizabeth died of hemorrhage. May 17. Their daughters, and here Marguerite's handwriting became even more careful, as if she understood the weight of what she was recording, are being protected under emergency guardianship protocol. "Claire has taken Anne's daughter. Josephine has taken Elizabeth's daughter. Both will raise these children as their own. The brothers must never know these children exist." Thora was crying silently, tears running down her face as she read the words that confirmed everything in Claire's letter. They continued through the ledger, finding the section marked "Dangerous Connections." Here Marguerite's tone changed from compassionate to grimly factual. Documentation of Jacques and Philippe Archambault's activities, smuggling, extortion, using the refuge as a cover for moving contraband across state lines. The brothers believe they can use this refuge for their purposes. One entry read, "They are wrong. I have documented everything. If they threaten this place or the people it protects, the evidence goes public." Beside this entry was a date, August 15, 1952, the month the Archambaults had left suddenly. In the wooden chest, they found birth certificates, both original and falsified. The original certificates for Anne's daughter and Elizabeth's daughter, dated May 1951, and then the false certificates, dated 1953 and 1955 respectively, showing Claire Merrin and Josephine Quade as birth mothers. There were also 2 letters, sealed in wax, one addressed to Anne's daughter, one to Elizabeth's daughter. Avis took the first letter with shaking hands. Thora took the second. Inside were words written by dying women to children they would never know. Anne's letter was brief, her handwriting clearly shaky. "My dear girl, I'm so sorry I won't be there to watch you grow. But know you were wanted. Know you were loved. Know that I fought to give you a chance at a life I couldn't have. Be brave, be free, be happy. That's all a mother can wish." Elizabeth's was longer, more detailed. "My sweet child, by the time you read this, you'll be grown. I hope you've had a good life, filled with love and safety. I couldn't give you those things, but I hope someone could. I was young and foolish, but you were never a mistake. You were hope itself. Remember that whatever your name is, wherever you are, you came from love. Not the man who fathered you, never him, but from me, and from the choice I made to run rather than submit. Be strong, be yourself. Be everything I didn't get to be. Both women sat on the floor of the West Wing, holding letters from mothers they'd never known, crying for lost women and lost possibilities and the fierce love that had saved them despite everything. Outside, car headlights appeared on the drive. Then more lights. Ruby's voice called out a warning. "He's here!" Antoine's back, and he's brought people with him. They could hear car doors slamming, voices raised. Someone was banging on the front door. "We need to document everything," Avis said, wiping her eyes and forcing herself into action. "Right now, before he finds a way to stop us." They began photographing pages frantically, understanding they were in a race against time and legal maneuvering. The truth was finally exposed, but only if they could protect it long enough for it to matter. Leonard had arrived with Ruby, both of them serving as witnesses and buffers against whatever Antoine was planning. Through the window, they could see him outside with two other men. One looked like a lawyer, briefcase in hand. The other might have been hired security. "Don't open the door," Leonard advised. "This is your property. He has no legal right to enter without your permission or a warrant." The banging continued, then stopped. Antoine's voice came through the door, controlled but with an edge of frustration. "Ladies, I know you're in there. I also know you found something. I can see lights in the West Wing. Whatever you're doing, you should know that I've filed an emergency injunction with the county court. It should be processed by morning. At that point, you'll be legally required to cease all activity and preserve any materials found on this property pending review." "That's not how injunctions work," Leonard called back. "They have to be served properly." "And they will be," Antoine replied. "By the sheriff, first thing tomorrow morning. I suggest you stop whatever you're doing and get some rest. This will all be sorted out through proper legal channels." They heard footsteps retreating, car doors opening and closing. But the vehicles didn't leave. They could see the headlights still illuminating the drive. Antoine was posting a watch, making sure they knew he was there. "He's trying to intimidate us," Thora said. "It's working a little," Avis admitted. "Can he really do this? Get an injunction that fast?" "If he has the right connections and enough money, yes," Leonard said grimly. "Small county courts can be flexible if the right pressure is applied. The question is whether it will hold up under scrutiny. But that could take days or weeks to determine. So we have tonight," Ruby said. "Whatever we're going to document, we do it now." They worked through the night in shifts. Avis and Thora photographed every page of the master ledger, using Ruby's high-quality camera to capture clear images. Leonard carefully catalogued each document, creating a detailed inventory. Ruby stood watch, monitoring Antoine's vehicles and reporting on any movement. The ledger was extensive, hundreds of entries spanning 14 years. Each one told a story of women and children who had come to the refuge seeking protection and left with new identities. New chances, new lives. They found entries that mentioned local families, including Ruby's grandmother, Marie Dubois, arrived June 1949 with 3 children, fleeing an abusive husband, relocated to Tennessee under the name Mary Brennan. Last report indicates she is thriving. Children are well. "I never knew," Ruby said softly, reading over their shoulders. "She never told anyone. She just started over." "That was the point," Leonard said gently. "A complete reset. No trails leading back, no connections that could bring danger forward." In the metal file boxes, they found supporting documentation, false birth certificates, travel papers, letters of reference for employment, even photographs taken at the refuge showing before and after images of the transformations Marguerite had orchestrated. Women arriving hollow-eyed and frightened, leaving with their shoulders back and hope in their faces. "This isn't just a refuge," Thora said. "This is a complete witness protection program, decades before such things officially existed, run by one determined French woman with resources and connections," Avis added, looking at a photograph of Marguerite Archambault. She must have been in her 60s when the photo was taken, dressed elegantly but practically, her expression reflecting both kindness and steel. She was extraordinary. The section on the Archambault brothers was damning. Marguerite had documented everything with the precision of someone who understood she was gathering evidence. Dates, times, amounts of money, names of people involved in their operations, receipts from suspicious transactions, testimony from women who had been threatened or coerced, letters showing the brothers had tried to use the refuge as cover for moving contraband and laundering money. Most importantly, there were depositions, sworn statements Marguerite had collected from several women, describing how Jacques and Philippe had manipulated them, made promises, gotten them pregnant, and then threatened to take the children once they were born. Anne and Elizabeth's statements were there too, written just days before they died. Anne's testimony was straightforward and heartbreaking. Jacques Archambault told me he loved me. He said we would marry. When I got pregnant, he said his family would never accept me, but he would take the baby and raise it properly. I realized he only wanted the child to use as leverage against my father, who has business connections in Charleston. I ran. Mrs. Archambault is hiding me. If anything happens to me, please don't let him have my baby. Elizabeth's was longer, more detailed. I met Philippe Archambault in New Orleans. He was charming, said he was a businessman. I didn't know about the smuggling until I overheard a phone call. When I confronted him, he threatened me, said if I told anyone, my family would be hurt. Then I found out I was pregnant. He said the baby would be his insurance, that my family would cooperate with his business because he'd threatened to take the child away if they didn't. I understood then that I was just a tool to him. Mrs. Archambault got me out. She's the only reason I'm alive now. Please, whoever reads this, don't let those men near any children. They were monsters, Ruby said quietly. They were criminals who saw women and children as commodities, Leonard corrected. And Marguerite stopped them. Near the bottom of the documentation pile, they found a sealed envelope marked Crisis Protocol, open only in emergency. Given that Antoine Archambault was currently camped outside their door, this seemed to qualify. Inside was another letter from Marguerite, dated December 1961, written 9 years after the refuge had closed. To whoever finds this in time of need, it began. If you are reading this, then the Archambault family has returned, seeking to destroy or control what is documented here. I want you to understand why these records must be preserved and made public if threatened. The refuge was never about hiding truth. It was about protecting innocence until truth could be safely told. Every woman and child who came through these doors had a story that deserved to be heard, honored, and preserved. But there were those who wanted to ensure some stories never got told. Jacques and Philippe Archambault used charm and money to hide their true nature. They hurt people, primarily women, and treated children as bargaining chips in their business dealings. I spent years gathering evidence against them. When I finally had enough, I gave them a choice: leave this area forever and cease their criminal activities, or I would expose everything. They chose to leave in August 1952, but they also threatened that they or their descendants would return someday to destroy these records. If that day has come, you must not surrender this documentation. It represents the truth of dozens of lives. It is evidence of crimes that may be beyond prosecution now, but should never be forgotten or forgiven. More importantly, some of the children protected by this refuge may still be living, unaware of their true origins. They deserve the chance to know where they came from, even if that knowledge comes with complications. Make copies, distribute them, send them to universities, historical societies, law enforcement if necessary. Do not let one powerful family erase the dignity and courage of so many powerless people. The Archambaults built their fortune on exploitation. Do not let them profit from silence about it. Stand firm. Protect the truth. That is the final purpose of this refuge. Marguerite Archambault, December 18th, 1961. They sat in silence for a moment after Leonard read the letter aloud. She knew, Avis said. She knew someone would come back for this, and she told us exactly what to do about it, Thora added. By dawn, they had photographed and catalogued everything. The memory cards from the camera had been copied multiple times, with duplicates hidden in different locations around the castle. They'd also uploaded the files to secure cloud storage. Using Ruby's laptop and personal account to create a backup, Antoine couldn't trace directly to them. The physical documents were returned to the vault, which they locked again. But now they had complete digital records of everything inside. When the sun rose, they were exhausted but prepared. Antoine's vehicles were still in the driveway, the occupants apparently having slept in their cars to maintain watch. At 8 o'clock, Sheriff Hartley's cruiser pulled up the drive. He got out slowly, looking distinctly uncomfortable, with legal papers in his hand. Leonard met him at the door. "Morning, Sheriff," Leonard Hartley acknowledged. "Ladies, I'm sorry about this, but I have to serve you with an injunction. Judge Mitchell signed it at 6 this morning. He handed over the papers. It requires you to cease any activity related to potential Archambault family materials, and to preserve everything in its current state pending a legal review." "We understand," Avis said calmly. "We'll comply fully." Antoine approached behind the sheriff, his lawyer beside him. "I'd like to inspect the property to ensure nothing has been removed or damaged." "No," Thora said firmly. "The injunction says preserve and cease activity. It doesn't grant you access to our home." The lawyer consulted his papers, frowning. "She's right. The injunction doesn't include inspection provisions." Antoine's jaw tightened. "Then I want it amended. That will require another hearing," Sheriff Hartley said. "Earliest would be Monday. It was Saturday morning. This is unacceptable," Antoine said. "They've had all night to tamper with evidence, to destroy documents." "We haven't destroyed anything," Avis interrupted. "Everything found on this property remains on this property, untouched and preserved. You'll have your legal review, but you don't get to storm into our home and rifle through our belongings on the basis of an injunction that was clearly rushed through without proper consideration." Sheriff Hartley looked between them, then at Antoine. "She's right, Mr. Archambault. The injunction is pretty limited. If you want more access, you'll need to go back to court." Antoine looked like he wanted to argue further, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm, murmuring something inaudible. Finally, Antoine turned and walked back to his car. "We'll see you in court on Monday," he called back. "And you should know, I've hired investigators to look into your backgrounds. Your property purchases, your finances, your families. If there's any impropriety, any connection you're hiding, I'll find it." After they left, the four of them stood in the castle's entrance hall, exhausted but victorious. "He doesn't know we've already documented everything," Ruby said. "And he won't until it's too late," Leonard agreed. "The question is, what do we do now? We have until Monday to make our next move." Avis and Thora looked at each other, a lifetime of friendship, and now shared origin, making communication nearly wordless. "We tell the truth," Avis said. "All of it. We contact historians, journalists, law enforcement," Thora continued. "We make sure this story is out there before Antoine can bury it, and we do it publicly," Avis finished. "So he can't make it disappear or use legal maneuvering to hide it away." They had 48 hours before the Monday hearing. 48 hours to turn the refuge's secret history into public knowledge. 48 hours to honor Marguerite's final instruction, protect the truth. The weekend became a whirlwind of strategic action. Leonard made calls to his contacts at the State Historical Society and several universities, with programs focused on women's history and post-war American social movements. Ruby reached out to a journalist friend who worked for a Charlotte newspaper. Avis and Thora spent Saturday afternoon composing a detailed account of what they'd found, including their own personal connection to the refuge. By Sunday morning, 3 historians had arrived at the castle, along with the journalist, a woman in her 40s named Patricia Chen, who specialized in investigative features. They spent hours reviewing the documented materials, taking notes, asking careful questions. "This is extraordinary," said Dr. Helen Voss, a professor of social history from Duke University. "A complete record of an underground network helping vulnerable women during a period when few official resources existed. And the detail, Marguerite Archambault documented everything with the precision of a trained archivist." The criminal evidence is equally significant, added Professor Marcus Brennan, who specialized in mid-century American crime. These documents could reopen investigations, even if prosecution is no longer possible. The connections between the Archambault brothers and various criminal enterprises, this is historically important. Patricia Chen was particularly interested in the human stories. These women deserve to have their courage recognized, she said. Every entry in that ledger represents someone who made an impossible choice and survived. That needs to be told. They agreed on a coordinated approach. The Historical Society would file for immediate preservation status. The academics would publish papers documenting the refuge's operation. And Patricia would write a feature article for the Charlotte Observer that would run on Monday morning, the same day as the court hearing. Once it's public, Leonard explained, Antoine can't make it disappear. He can still try to claim family rights to physical documents, but the information itself will be protected as historical record. Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A woman in her late 70s pulled up to the castle in an old sedan, moving slowly but with determination. She introduced herself as Marie Brennan, Ruby's grandmother. Ruby told me what you found, Marie said, her accent carrying traces of French. I need to tell you my story. For the article, for the record, they sat together in the library. Patricia's recorder capturing every word as Marie described. Arriving at the refuge in 1949, with 3 young children and a broken jaw from her husband's final beating, Marguerite saved our lives, Marie said simply. She gave me a new name, new papers, and sent us to Tennessee where her cousin had a textile mill. She found me work, found school for my children. My husband looked for us for years, but he never found us. I raised my babies in peace because of her. When I heard someone was trying to hide what she did, Marie's voice strengthened. No, the world needs to know what she accomplished. More stories emerged throughout Sunday. Leonard's research had identified other families in the region with possible connections to the refuge, and word was spreading. By evening, 6 more people had come forward, each with a connection to the refuge, a grandmother who'd been helped, a mother who'd found safety there, an aunt who'd worked alongside Marguerite. This is bigger than we realized, Thora said that evening. The refugee didn't just help a few dozen women. It created a whole network of survivors, and Antoine wants to bury all of it to protect his family's reputation, Avis added. Monday morning arrived with the weight of confrontation. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the county courthouse. Antoine arrived with 2 lawyers and an air of confidence that suggested he expected a quick resolution. What he didn't expect was the courtroom gallery filled with people, historians, journalists, descendants of refuge families, and local residents who'd learned about the discovery over the weekend. Judge Mitchell looked distinctly uncomfortable as he reviewed the file. Antoine's lead attorney, a polished man named Robert Driscoll, presented their case first. Your Honor, my client is a direct descendant of the Archambault family and has legitimate claims to any family papers or documents found on the former family estate. We're requesting that all materials found in the vault be turned over for family review and possible disposition. Thora's attorney, Marcus Fenton, a semi-retired lawyer Leonard had recruited, stood up. Your Honor, that's a euphemism for destruction. Mr. Archambault wants to erase historical evidence because it's unflattering to his family. That's an outrageous accusation. Driscoll objected. Is it? Marcus produced a folder. I have here copies of communications between Mr. Archambault and various parties, offering substantial sums of money for full discretion regarding any documents found. He's not interested in preservation. He's interested in suppression. Judge Mitchell frowned. Mr. Driscoll. Before the attorney could respond, Marcus continued. Furthermore, Your Honor, I filed emergency petitions with the State Historical Society and the National Archives. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the Archambault refuge records have been designated as historically significant materials subject to preservation laws. Any attempt to destroy or conceal them would be a federal offense. The courtroom stirred with murmurs. Antoine's expression shifted from confident to angry. "Your Honor," Driscoll said tightly, "this is legal maneuvering to prevent my client from exercising his legitimate family rights." "What legitimate rights?" Judge Mitchell interrupted. "To destroy evidence of criminal activity? That's what this is about, isn't it? My client is not responsible for alleged activities of distant relatives who died decades ago, but he's built his fortune on the proceeds of those activities," Marcus interjected. "Which brings me to another point." He produced another document. "I've also contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division. The documentation found in the vault includes evidence of money laundering and smuggling operations from the 1940s. And refugees, some of that money can be traced directly to the establishment of Archambault Enterprises in France, the company my client currently operates." Antoine stood up abruptly. "This is absurd. You're reaching back 70 years to attack a legitimate business." "Sit down, Mr. Archambault," Judge Mitchell said sharply. Then to Marcus, "Are you seriously suggesting current criminal liability?" "I'm suggesting that the source of Mr. Archambault's wealth is directly connected to his family's criminal activities, and that gives the government a potential interest in these records. At minimum, it undermines his claim that this is simply about family heritage." Patricia Chen stood up in the gallery. "Your Honor, if I may, I'm a journalist with the Charlotte Observer. We're running a feature this morning on the Archambault refuge and its historical significance. This story is now a matter of public record and public interest." Judge Mitchell looked at Antoine with open suspicion. "Mr. Archambault, did you know about these criminal allegations when you filed your injunction? I knew my family had a complex history. Did you know about specific criminal activities?" Antoine's silence was answer enough. "Your Honor," Driscoll tried to salvage the situation. "Whatever the historical complications, my client does have a genetic connection to the property's original owners." "Speaking of genetic connections," Marcus said, pulling out yet another document, "I have here DNA analysis results. My clients, Ms. Merrin and Ms. Quade, agreed to genetic testing as part of our research into the refuge records." Avis and Thora exchanged glances. They'd agreed to the testing on Saturday, working with a rapid analysis service Leonard had found, but hadn't yet seen the results. Marcus continued, "The results show that both women share significant paternal DNA markers with Mr. Archambault. Specifically, markers indicating their biological fathers were brothers, Jacques and Philippe Archambault." The courtroom erupted. Antoine's face went pale. "What?" Avis whispered to Thora. "That's impossible," Antoine said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's not impossible," Marcus said. "It's documented in the refuge records. Jacques and Philippe Archambault fathered children with two women who died in childbirth at the refuge in 1951. Those children were protected by being given false identities and raised by women who worked at the refuge. Those children are my clients." Judge Mitchell looked between Antoine and the two women. "So Ms. Merrin and Ms. Quade are also Archambault descendants?" "Biologically, yes, which means they have the same claim, actually a stronger claim, given their direct connection to the refuge and their status as property owners, to any family materials found on the premises." Antoine found his voice. "They have no right. Their parents were criminals who what?" Thora interrupted, standing up. "Who saved our lives? Who protected us from men who would have used us as leverage in criminal enterprises? Your great-uncles were monsters, Mr. Archambault. They got two young women pregnant as part of business schemes. When those women ran away and died giving birth to us, the refuge protected us by giving us new identities. The records document all of this," Avis added, also standing, "including the threats your great-uncles made against the refuge, against Marguerite Archambault, against anyone who interfered with their plans. They wanted to claim us as children, not out of love, but to use us as bargaining chips." Antoine sat down heavily, his lawyers conferring with him in urgent whispers. Judge Mitchell removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "This is far more complicated than a simple property dispute. Mr. Driscoll, your client's injunction was filed under false pretenses. He presented this as a straightforward matter of family heritage when he knew, or should have known, about criminal implications and genetic complications. Your Honor, I'm dissolving the injunction, Judge Mitchell continued. Ms. Merrin and Ms. Quade have full rights to all materials found on their property. If Mr. Archambault wants to make any claims, he can file a proper suit with full disclosure of all relevant facts. But given what I've heard today, I'd advise against it. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. As people filed out of the courtroom, Antoine approached Avis and Thora, his lawyers trying to hold him back. His polished veneer had cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. You don't understand what you're doing, he said in a low, urgent voice. My business, my family's reputation, this will destroy everything we've built. Everything you've built was funded by exploitation and crime, Avis said quietly. Maybe it deserves to be destroyed. I'm not them, Antoine said, and for the first time he sounded genuine. I'm not Jacques and Philippe. I didn't know. I knew there were stories, but not... He stopped, visibly struggling. My father never told me the details. He just said the American branch of the family had done things during the war that were best forgotten. They weren't just forgotten, Thora said. They were hidden, along with the stories of the women they hurt and the children they tried to claim. I'm one of those children, Avis added. So is Thora. We have just as much right to the Archambault name as you do. More, actually, because we're choosing to honor the good parts of that legacy, Marguerite and her refuge, instead of hiding the bad parts. Antoine looked at them both, seeing, perhaps for the first time, that they weren't just obstacles to his plans, but actual relatives. Family he'd tried to intimidate and legally suppress. What will you do with the records? He asked. Make them public, Avis said. Donate them to archives. Let historians study them. Make sure the women who were helped are remembered and honored. And make sure everyone knows what your great-uncles did, Thora added. Not to punish you, but because the truth matters. Antoine stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. His lawyers followed, already discussing appeals and damage control. Outside the courthouse, Patricia Chen was interviewing Marie Brennan for her article. Ruby stood with her grandmother, holding her hand, as the older woman described the refuge with tears running down her face. The truth is out, Leonard said, joining Avis and Thora. Antoine can't stop it now. No, Avis agreed. But what do we do now? We came here looking for a fresh start, and instead we found out we're part of a family we never knew we had. A family with both heroes and villains in it. We honor the heroes, Thora said firmly. We turn the castle into something that celebrates what Marguerite did. We tell the stories that deserve telling, and we figure out who we really are, Avis added quietly. Because we're not just Avis Merrin and Thora Quade anymore. We're also, she hesitated over the name, we're also survivors, Thora finished. Children who were protected by extraordinary women. That's who we are. They stood together outside the courthouse, two women who'd thought they were buying a building, but had actually bought their own history. The castle waited for them in the mountains, no longer holding secrets, but ready to tell stories. And they were ready to listen. The week following the hearing transformed everything. Patricia Chen's article in the Charlotte Observer ran on Tuesday morning under the headline, The Refuge, How One Woman Saved Dozens in Post-War Appalachia. It was picked up by the Associated Press and ran in newspapers across the country. By Wednesday, national news organizations were calling, wanting interviews and access to the castle. Dr. Voss and her colleagues from Duke moved quickly to establish proper archival protocols. They arrived at the castle on Tuesday afternoon with a team of graduate students and proper preservation equipment. The vault contents were carefully removed, each item photographed, catalogued, and prepared for eventual transfer to the state archives. We'll create a digital archive that will be freely accessible, Dr. Voss explained. Every document, every photograph, every entry in the ledger. This is too important to be locked away. Ruby's general store became an informal headquarters for the growing community of people connected to the refuge. Descendants of women who'd been helped started arriving. some from as far away as California and Maine. Drawn by Patricia's article and the promise of learning more about grandmothers and great-grandmothers who'd never spoken about their pasts. Each visitor brought new pieces to the puzzle. Photograph, letter, family stories that had been passed down in fragments and were now finding context in the refuge records. The library at the castle became a gathering place where people shared their histories and discovered unexpected connections. Marie Brennan spent hours helping identify people in the old refuge photographs. "That's Simone Cartier," she'd say, pointing to a woman in a 1950 photo. "She went to Philadelphia, became a teacher. Her daughter is a doctor now." Each identification restored a name, a story, a dignity that had been hidden by necessity but could now be celebrated. But while the refuge story was spreading into public knowledge, Avis and Thora were dealing with private reckonings. The DNA results had confirmed they were half-sisters, daughters of brothers, connected by blood they'd never known about. It should have been shocking, but somehow it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. "We always felt like sisters anyway," Thora said one evening as they sat in the library. "Now we know why. Do you want to keep the Archambault name?" Avis asked. "Legally, we could claim it," Thora considered. "No, we're Merrin and Quade. Those are the mothers who raised us, who sacrificed for us. Whatever genetic connection we have to the Archambault family, Claire and Josephine were our real mothers." "Agreed," Avis said. "Though I think we should acknowledge both Anne and Elizabeth somehow. They died bringing us into the world. That deserves recognition." They decided to create a memorial wall in the castle, honoring all 4 women who'd given them life in different ways. It would be part of the museum component they were planning for Second Wind Lodge. Leonard helped them design the memorial. "Marguerite should be there too," he suggested. "And maybe a general plaque for all the women of the refuge, helpers and helped both." By Thursday, the State Historical Society had officially designated the castle as a protected heritage site. This came with both benefits and responsibilities, funding for proper preservation, but also regulations about what could and couldn't be changed. "You can still turn it into your hiker's lodge," the Historical Society representative assured them. "But certain rooms need to be preserved as they were. The West Wing, the library, the nursery, these have historical significance now." Friday brought an unexpected development. Sheriff Hartley stopped by with news that made everyone stop what they were doing. "Antoine Archambault contacted my office," he said. "He wants to meet with you both. Says he has something important to discuss." "Is this some kind of trick?" Thora asked suspiciously. "I don't think so. He sounds different, less aggressive. He asked if you'd meet him on neutral ground, and he specifically said he wants to come alone. No lawyers. After conferring with Leonard and Marcus Fenton, they agreed to meet at Ruby's General Store on Saturday afternoon. Leonard and Marcus would be present as witnesses, but it would be a conversation, not a legal proceeding. Saturday arrived cool and clear. Early autumn beginning to paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. Antoine arrived on time, driving himself in a rental car rather than the expensive sedan he'd arrived in the previous week. He looked tired, his usual polish diminished by something that might have been genuine distress. They gathered in the store's back room, Ruby providing coffee while maintaining a respectful distance. Antoine sat across from Avis and Thora, not speaking for a long moment. "I've spent the last week learning things about my family that I wish I didn't know," he finally said. "My father died 5 years ago. Before he died, he told me there were complications in our family history in America, but he made it sound like old debts or failed business ventures. He never told me about Jacques and Philippe. Not really. Not what they actually did. And now you know," Avis said. "Now I know they were criminals who hurt people, who used women and children as tools in their schemes, who built the foundation of our family fortune on exploitation." Antoine pulled out a folder and set it on the table. "I hired investigators to look into our business history. This is what they found." The folder contained financial records, tracing the Archambault business interests back through several generations. The initial capital that started the family's European enterprises had come directly from illegal operations in the United States in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Everything I have came from that, Antoine said quietly. My education, my home, my children's futures, all built on money my great-uncles made by threatening and manipulating vulnerable people. What are you going to do about it? Thora asked. I don't know yet, but I wanted you to know that I'm not fighting you anymore. The records should be public. The stories should be told. My family's reputation, he made a helpless gesture. Maybe it deserves whatever damage this does to it. This isn't about punishing you, Avis said. You didn't do what they did. No, but I benefited from it. I am who I am because of what they did. That's not nothing. Antoine looked at both women. I also wanted to say I'm sorry for threatening you, for trying to hide the truth, for treating you like obstacles instead of... He paused. Instead of family, the word hung in the air between them. We are family, Thora said slowly. Technically. Though it's a strange kind of family connection. The strangest, Antoine agreed with a bitter smile. My great-uncles fathered you, which makes you my... What? Second cousins? First cousins once removed? I'm not even sure of the terminology. Does it matter? Avis asked. Family is complicated. We learned that this past month. Sometimes the people who raise you matter more than the people who made you. Sometimes blood connections mean everything, and sometimes they mean nothing. What do you want from us? Thora asked directly. Antoine seemed to consider this carefully. Nothing. Or maybe permission. I'd like to visit the refugee records at some point to understand fully what my family did. And I'd like to contribute to the preservation efforts. Money for the archives, for the memorial you're planning. Let me do something good with money that came from something bad. They talked for another hour, establishing a careful détente that might someday become something more substantial. Antoine wasn't asking for forgiveness, exactly, and they weren't offering unconditional acceptance. But they were acknowledging the complicated truth of their shared history. As Antoine was leaving, he turned back at the door. The recording, he said, the one Marguerite made of her confronting Jacques and Philippe. Would it be possible to hear it? Why? Avis asked. Because I need to know exactly what they were, what they sounded like when they were threatening people, when they thought no one could stop them. I need to hear it to believe it fully. They agreed to let him listen to it at the castle the following week, with Leonard and Marcus present. Antoine left with a stiff nod, driving away in his modest rental car. Do you trust him? Ruby asked after he'd gone. I'm not sure, Thora admitted. But I think he's genuinely struggling with what he learned. Learning your family fortune is built on crime and cruelty. That would shake anyone, Leonard observed. The question is what he does next. Whether he really tries to make amends, or whether this is just temporary guilt that fades once he's back home in France. Sunday was spent preparing for the memorial dedication they'd scheduled for the following Saturday. Local craftspeople had created beautiful plaques, and a mason had built a stone wall in the castle's entrance hall where they would be mounted. The main plaque would honor Marguerite Archambault. With her dates and a quote from her final letter, the refuge was never about hiding truth. It was about protecting innocence until truth could be safely told. Below that would be plaques for Claire Merrin and Josephine Quade, identifying them as midwives and guardians who had protected children at great personal risk. Smaller plaques would honor Anne and Elizabeth, mothers who gave their lives to give life. And at the bottom, a larger plaque listing the names of all the women and children the refuge had helped, dozens of names that had been hidden for decades and could now be spoken aloud. Patricia Chen had arranged for several media outlets to cover the dedication. Dr. Voss was planning to speak about the historical significance. Marie Brennan had agreed to share her story publicly, and Ruby had coordinated with descendants of refuge families across the country, many of whom were traveling to attend. Monday through Friday passed in a blur of preparation. The castle was cleaned and prepared for visitors. A tent was erected on the lawn for the ceremony. The local Methodist church offered to provide music. Ruby's store donated food for the reception. The entire community of Ridgemont seemed to be invested in honoring the refugees' legacy. Antoine returned on Thursday as promised to hear the recording. They gathered in the library. Avis, Thora, Antoine, Leonard, and Marcus and Leonard set up the old reel-to-reel player. The tape crackled and hissed. Then Marguerite's voice emerged, clear and firm, despite the decades. "Gentlemen, your presence here is no longer welcome." Jacques' voice followed, cold and condescending. "You're making a mistake interfering in family matters. These women are not family matters. They are human beings whom you have hurt and threatened." Philippe's voice, younger sounding and more desperate. "We need those children. They're our blood. They are innocent lives, not your bargaining chips." The conversation continued, growing more heated. The brothers threatened. Marguerite remained calm but unyielding. They made explicit references to their smuggling operations, to money they'd hidden, to connections they had with people who could make problems disappear. And finally, Marguerite's declaration: "I have documented everything. Every illegal transaction, every threat, every woman you've hurt. If anything happens to me, to this refuge, or to those children, it all becomes public. Your choice, gentlemen. Leave and never return, or face exposure and prosecution." The tape ended with the sound of chairs scraping, footsteps, a door slamming. Antoine sat in silence for several minutes after the recording finished, his face pale. "They really were monsters," he finally said, his voice rough. "I keep hoping there's some context that makes it less terrible, but there isn't, is there?" "No," Avis said gently. "There isn't. But Marguerite stopped them," Thora added. "One woman with courage and careful documentation stopped two men who thought they were untouchable." Antoine looked at her. "And saved you in the process." "She saved a lot of people," Avis agreed. "That's what we're celebrating on Saturday. Not the evil that was done, but the good that fought against it. May I come?" Antoine asked. "To the dedication?" They exchanged glances. "If you come as someone honoring Marguerite and the refuge," Thora said slowly. "Not as an Archambault claiming family rights. I'll come as someone trying to understand how to live with an inherited legacy I never chose but can't escape," Antoine said. "Is that acceptable?" It was. Saturday morning dawned brilliant and clear, the kind of autumn day that makes the mountains look like they're on fire with color. By 9 o'clock, cars were already arriving at the castle, parking along the long drive and in the meadow that Ruby's brother had cleared for the occasion. Avis and Thora stood at the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. Some were familiar faces: Leonard, Ruby, Sheriff Hartley, the academics from Duke, Patricia Chen with her photographer. Others were strangers who introduced themselves as descendants of women the refuge had helped. My grandmother was Sarah Willoughby, a woman in her 50s said, showing them a photograph of a young woman from the 1950s. She came here in 1953. Marguerite helped her get to Ohio, gave her a new name, helped her start over. She never told us the details, but she always said this place saved her life. My mother never spoke about it, said an elderly man with a cane. But I found letters after she died. Letters from someone named Marguerite, checking on her through the years, making sure she was all right. Story after story, each one adding texture to their understanding of what Marguerite had accomplished. The refuge hadn't just provided temporary shelter. It had created a network of care that lasted decades. By 10 o'clock, more than 200 people had gathered on the castle lawn. The tent was full, with people standing at the edges. Local news crews had set up cameras. Patricia Chen was moving through the crowd, recording conversations and stories for a follow-up article. Antoine arrived quietly, parking far from the entrance and walking up alone. He wore simple clothes, no expensive suit, no visible symbols of wealth. Avis spotted him standing at the edge of the crowd, looking uncertain about whether he belonged. She walked over to him. You came." "I almost didn't," Antoine admitted. "This is your day, yours and Thora's and all these families. I don't have any right to be part of it. You have the right to witness it," Avis said. "To understand what your family could have been, instead of what Jacques and Philippe chose to make it." She led him to a seat near the back of the tent, not with the family members, but not isolated either. a place where he could observe and learn. The ceremony began with music from the church choir, their voices carrying across the mountains. Then Leonard stepped forward as master of ceremonies, introducing the day's significance. "Today we honor courage," he began. "The courage of Marguerite Archambault, who built a refuge for those who had none. The courage of Claire Merrin and Josephine Quade, who protected children at great personal cost. The courage of dozens of women who fled danger and rebuilt their lives. And the courage of 2 women who bought an old castle and uncovered a truth that demanded to be told." Dr. Voss spoke next about the historical significance of the refuge, comparing it to other underground networks that had operated during the same period. "But what makes the Archambault refuge unique," she said, "is the documentation. Marguerite kept meticulous records, not just of logistics, but of humanity. She wrote about these women with compassion and respect. She preserved their stories, even as she helped them create new identities." Marie Brennan was helped to the podium, her voice shaking but clear as she shared her story. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word as she described arriving at the refuge with 3 children and nothing but fear. "And leaving with hope and a future. I have 23 grandchildren and great-grandchildren now," Marie concluded. "Every one of them exists because Marguerite Archambault saw me as a human being worth saving. How do you thank someone for that? How do you honor a gift that big? You tell the story. You make sure it's never forgotten." Then Avis and Thora stood together at the podium, and Avis began to speak. "3 months ago, we were just 2 widows looking for a fresh start. We bought a castle because it seemed like an adventure, a way to fill empty days with purpose. We had no idea we were coming home." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "This place holds our origins. Our biological mothers died here, giving us life. Our real mothers, the women who raised us, worked here, protecting us and others. For 60 years, this truth was hidden because it needed to be. Because children's lives depended on silence," Thora continued. "Now the children are grown. Now the danger has passed. Now the story can be told. And what a story it is. Not just about us, but about all of you, about all the families who have connections to this place. We're turning this castle into Second Wind Lodge," Avis said. "A place where hikers can find rest and restoration. But it will also be a memorial, a museum, a place where these stories are preserved and honored, where people can come to learn about Marguerite Archambault and the refuge she created. And maybe," Thora added, "a place where people who are struggling can find inspiration in knowing that others have faced impossible situations and survived. That courage and compassion can triumph over cruelty. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things." They unveiled the memorial plaques together, pulling away the cloth that had covered the wall. The crowd stood, applauding as the names and words were revealed. People moved forward to read the inscriptions, to touch the stone, to see if they recognized names. Patricia Chen was photographing everything, capturing the emotional responses, an elderly woman crying as she touched her mother's name, a middle-aged man tracing his grandmother's entry with shaking fingers, children being lifted up by parents to see the plaques that honored their ancestors. Ruby found a discovery that took her breath away. One of the smaller plaques listed women who had worked at the refuge alongside Marguerite. And there, near the bottom, Ruby Brennan, kitchen manager and friend, 1948-1952. "That was my great-grandmother," Ruby said, tears streaming down her face. "I never knew. She died when I was a baby. Nobody ever told me she worked here." Leonard wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Now you know. Now everyone knows." As the formal ceremony ended and people began to move through the castle in small groups, seeing the rooms that had been preserved, reading the displays that Dr. Voss's team had created, Antoine approached Avis and Thora again. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me be here, for letting me see what this place really meant. What will you do now?" Thora asked. "When you go back to France?" Antoine was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet, but I've been thinking. Marguerite never had children of her own. The refuge was her legacy. Maybe I can honor that legacy in some way. Not to erase what Jacques and Philippe did, but to balance it somehow." "How?" Avis asked. "I'm not sure yet. But my company has resources. Maybe we could establish a foundation, something that helps women and children in crisis, the way Marguerite did. Something that turns the Archambault name into something worth preserving for good reasons, instead of hiding for bad ones. That would be meaningful. Thora said carefully. It won't fix anything, Antoine said. Won't change history or make up for what they did. But maybe it's a start. He looked at the memorial wall, at Marguerite's name and her quote. She was the best of us, he said quietly. The only Archambault who deserves to be remembered. I'd like to help make sure she is. After he left, promising to stay in touch, to follow through on his idea for a foundation, Avis and Thora stood together looking at the memorial. We did it, Thora said. We found the truth and we protected it. And now what? Avis asked. The castle is going to be both a lodge and a museum. Guests and historians and descendants visiting. This is going to be our lives now, managing this place, telling this story. Is that what you want? Avis considered, then smiled. Yes, I think it is. We came here looking for a second chance. Turns out we were giving one to all these stories that needed to be told. That feels right. It does, Thora agreed. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the memorial wall. I wish we could show this to them. To Claire and Josephine. Let them know we understand now. That we're not angry about the lies. That we're grateful. Maybe they know, Avis said. Somehow. As evening fell and the last visitors departed, promising to return to bring others to help spread the refuge's story, Avis and Thora walked through the castle room one final time. Everything had changed, but everything also felt settled in a way it hadn't before. The castle was no longer just a building. It was a testament, a memorial, a home, and they were no longer just two widows looking for a fresh start. They were guardians of a story that deserved telling, descendants of women who'd been brave enough to fight for what was right, keepers of a legacy that would outlive them all. The week following the dedication brought unexpected developments. Patricia Chen's follow-up article appeared in the Charlotte Observer with the headline, "Two Widows Discover Their Sisters and Heirs to a Hidden Legacy of Courage." The story went viral on social media, picked up by national outlets and shared hundreds of thousands of times. The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from people across the country, some sharing their own family stories of hidden pasts and women who'd helped them, others offering donations for the refuge preservation efforts, still others asking if they could visit the castle or access the records. Dr. Voss called on Tuesday morning with news that would change everything again. "We've been contacted by the National Archives," she said, barely containing her excitement. "They want to feature the refuge records in a major exhibition on post-war American social networks. This would be displayed in Washington, toured to other cities. The refugee story would reach millions of people." "That's wonderful," Avis said, then paused. "But the records contain personal information about people who needed secrecy. We're working with privacy experts and legal scholars," Dr. Voss assured her. "Any identifying information about people still living or their close descendants would be redacted. But the stories themselves, the documentation of what Marguerite accomplished, that can and should be shared. With your permission, of course, as the property owners," Avis and Thora agreed, understanding that this was exactly what Marguerite would have wanted. Not the secrecy to continue forever, but for the truth to emerge when it could safely do so. Wednesday brought Antoine's lawyer, but not with threats this time. Instead, Robert Driscoll carried documents establishing the foundation Antoine had mentioned. The Marguerite Archambault Foundation, endowed with a substantial initial grant from Antoine's personal assets, dedicated to helping women and children escaping domestic violence and abuse. "Mr. Archambault wanted you to review the Foundation's mission statement before it's finalized," Driscoll explained, his entire demeanor different from their first encounter. "He wants to ensure it honors his great-aunt's work appropriately. The mission statement was thoughtful and specific, outlining programs that would provide safe housing, legal assistance, job training, and identity protection services. essentially modernizing what Marguerite had done in the 1940s and 50s. He's serious about this, Thora said after Driscoll left. It seems so, Avis agreed. Maybe people can change. Or maybe discovering your family history is built on exploitation makes you want to build something better. Thursday afternoon, Sheriff Hartley stopped by with interesting news. You remember how Antoine mentioned having investigators look into things? Well, those same investigators kept digging. They found evidence that suggests there might be other refugees, other places Marguerite helped establish or support. There's reference in some of the letters to sister houses in other states. More refugees? Avis asked. Looks like it. Possibly a whole network. The investigators found mentions of places in Virginia, Tennessee, maybe as far as Texas, all operating quietly in the late 1940s and early 1950s, all seemingly connected to Marguerite's operation here. Leonard arrived within the hour of hearing this news, bringing his historical research materials. I've been looking into this too, he said. There are gaps in records from that period. Women and children who appeared in census data under names that have no prior history. Families that materialized seemingly out of nowhere in various southern and border states. A whole network, Thora said wonderingly. Marguerite wasn't working alone. She couldn't have been, Leonard agreed. Moving people across state lines, creating documentation, finding safe houses and employment that required connections and coordination. There might be records here that document it, Avis realized. We should look through everything again, specifically for references to other locations. They spent Thursday evening and most of Friday searching through the vault materials with new focus. And they found it. A ledger separate from the main refuge record, listing contacts in different states. Names of people willing to help, addresses of safe houses, even some coded language about capabilities and capacities. This is huge, Dr. Voss said when they showed her Friday afternoon. This wasn't just one refuge. This was an underground railroad for abused women and children, operating decades before such support networks existed officially. Marguerite Archambault created an entire system and probably saved hundreds of lives, Leonard added. By Saturday, they knew they needed to share this discovery. They called an informal gathering at the castle, inviting the key people who'd been involved in the refuge story, Dr. Voss, Patricia Chen, Marcus Fenton, Sheriff Hartley, Ruby and Marie and Antoine, who'd stayed in Ridgemont rather than returning immediately to France. They gathered in the library, the room that had become the heart of their work. And Avis laid out what they'd discovered. Marguerite's refuge wasn't an isolated effort, she explained. It was part of a larger network. We found evidence of at least 8 other locations across the South and border states, all operating during the same period, all apparently coordinated through some kind of loose association. Who ran them? Patricia asked, already taking notes. Different people. Some were religious organizations operating quietly. Some were wealthy women using their resources to help. A few were doctors or nurses who provided medical care and safe spaces. But they all seemed to know about each other, to refer women to each other's locations depending on circumstances. The first underground railroad helped people escape slavery, Dr. Voss said slowly. This was a second underground railroad helping people escape abuse. And nobody knew about it, because it was designed to be invisible, Leonard said. The whole point was to help people disappear safely. That required secrecy that lasted decades. Until now, Thora added. Antoine had been quiet through most of the discussion. Now he spoke up. This changes the Foundation's scope. If there was a network, we should honor all of it. The Foundation shouldn't just help in one location. It should operate nationally, the way Marguerite's network did. That's a much larger undertaking, Marcus Fenton pointed out. More complex legally, more expensive. I know, Antoine interrupted. But it's the right thing to do. These women created something extraordinary that helped people for years. The least we can do is revive that network, modernize it, make it sustainable. We'd need to research the other locations, Dr. Voss said. Find out if there are records, if there are descendants who know the stories. Then let's do that, Patricia said. This is more than a local history piece now. This is a national story about women helping women when no official help existed. They talked late into the evening, planning and coordinating. Dr. Voss would lead the academic research into the other refuge locations. Patricia would expand her reporting to cover the full network. Antoine would work with lawyers to restructure his foundation to operate nationally. Marcus would handle the legal complexities of establishing the castle as the central archive for the entire network's history. As people were leaving, Sheriff Hartley pulled Avis and Thora aside. "My mother wants to meet you," he said. "She's been following all of this, and she says it's time she told her story. She was born here at the refuge in 1958, but she never knew the details. She'd like to see the records about her mother if they exist." "Of course," Thora said immediately. "Bring her by any time." "Tomorrow?" Hartley asked. "Sunday afternoon?" "She's nervous but determined." They agreed, and Hartley left with a grateful nod. After everyone had gone, Avis and Thora sat in the library with cups of tea, surrounded by the documents and photographs that had transformed their lives. "This is bigger than we ever imagined," Avis said. "Much bigger," Thora agreed. "We thought we were just opening a vault. We were actually opening a door to a whole hidden history. Are you sorry?" Avis asked. "That we bought this place, that we found all of this. Our lives would be simpler if we just bought a regular house somewhere." Thora considered the question seriously. "No, I'm not sorry. We came here looking for a second chance at life. Instead, we found out we were given a second chance at life decades ago by women who sacrificed everything to protect us. How could I be sorry about learning that? And now we get to honor them," Avis said. "Not just Claire and Josephine, but Marguerite and all the others who were part of this network. We get to make sure their courage is remembered. We get to continue their work," Thora corrected gently. "The lodge, the museum, the foundation, it's all continuing what they started. Helping people who need refuge find it." They sat in comfortable silence. These two women who'd thought they were just friends and turned out to be sisters, who'd thought they knew their histories and discovered they'd been living their mother's greatest secret, who'd bought a castle and found a calling. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, holding their own secrets and stories. Inside, the castle, once abandoned, once cursed, now restored, held the promise of continued purpose. A refuge then, a refuge still, a refuge forever. Tomorrow would bring Sheriff Hartley's mother and her story. Next week would bring more descendants, more researchers, more pieces of the puzzle. But tonight, there was just this quiet moment of understanding that some accidents are actually destiny, and some purchases are actually homecomings. "Second wind," Avis said quietly. "That's what we named the lodge. A second chance at breath, at life. Everyone who came here got a second wind," Thora agreed, "including us." They raised their teacups in a silent toast to Marguerite, to Claire and Josephine, to Anne and Elizabeth, to all the women of the refuge, known and unknown, to second chances and hidden courage, to truth that waits decades to be told, to friendship that turns out to be family, to the unexpected grace of finding home in the last place you expected to look. 3 months after the dedication ceremony, on a cold December morning, Second Wind Lodge officially opened for guests. The transformation was complete. 12 guest rooms restored with careful attention to historical accuracy, while adding modern amenities, a dining hall that could seat 40 people, and a common room with the working fireplace, where so many secrets had been hidden and revealed. The museum component occupied the entire west wing. Visitors could see the vault itself, still in place behind the fireplace, but now with glass panels, allowing people to view it without touching. Display cases held selected documents from the refuge records, carefully chosen items that told the story without compromising anyone's privacy. Interactive exhibits explained how the underground network had operated, and a memorial room honored all the women and children who'd been helped. The first guests were a group of women hiking the Appalachian Trail, just as Avis and Thora had originally imagined. They arrived cold and tired, grateful for hot food and warm beds, exactly the kind of refuge the castle had always been meant to provide. But the lodge quickly became something more. Descendants of refuge families made pilgrimages to see where their grandmothers or great-grandmothers had found safety. Researchers came to access the archives. Women's organizations used it for retreats and conferences. The castle became a living memorial, serving its original purpose while honoring its history. Avis and Thora had found their rhythm as innkeepers, historians, and guardians of the refuge story. Mornings were spent managing the lodge, preparing meals, checking guests in and out, handling the 100 small details that kept the place running. Afternoons often involved working with researchers or giving tours to visitors. Evenings were their own, usually spent in the library where everything had begun. Ruby had become the lodge's unofficial co-manager, splitting her time between her store and the castle. Her knowledge of the local area and her own family connection to the refuge made her invaluable for helping visitors understand the broader context of what Marguerite had accomplished. Leonard served as the historical consultant, spending several days a week at the castle cataloguing materials and helping researchers. He'd begun writing a comprehensive history of the refuge network, working with Dr. Voss's team to piece together the full story from multiple archives and locations. Sheriff Hartley's mother, Linda, had become a regular visitor, volunteering in the museum and sharing her story with interested guests. She'd found her mother's entry in the refuge records and learned that her father had been a violent man. Her mother fled when Linda was just an infant. "I'm 67 years old," Linda told visitors, "and I'm just now learning why my mother was the strongest woman I ever knew. She gave me a life she didn't have. That's what this place did. It gave women and children lives they wouldn't have had otherwise." Antoine had returned to France but stayed in close contact. The Marguerite Archambault Foundation was now operational in 8 states, with plans to expand further. It had already helped more than 200 women and children in its first few months, providing safe housing, legal assistance, and support services. Antoine sent monthly updates and photographs, documenting how his family name was being reclaimed for something good. Marguerite would have liked this, he'd written in his last email. Using Archambault wealth, even if it came from terrible sources, to help people the way she did. It doesn't erase what Jacques and Philippe did, but maybe it balances the scales a little. On a crisp Saturday afternoon in early spring, 6 months after opening the lodge, Avis and Thora stood at the castle entrance as a car pulled up. An elderly woman emerged slowly, helped by a younger woman who might have been her daughter. The older woman looked up at the castle, and tears immediately began streaming down her face. "I never thought I'd see it again," she said. "I was here in 1950. I was 17. Marguerite saved my life. Her name was Helen Rodriguez now, but it had been Helena Kowalski when she arrived at the refuge. Pregnant and fleeing an abusive father who'd arranged her marriage to a man she'd never met. Marguerite had helped her terminate the forced engagement, provided medical care, and sent her to California with a new identity. "I built a whole life out there," Helen said as they walked through the castle. "Married a good man, raised 4 children, became a teacher. But I never forgot this place. Never forgot Marguerite or the other women who helped me." They spent the afternoon recording Helen's story, adding another thread to the tapestry of experiences that made up the refuge's history. Before she left, Helen stood before the memorial wall, touching Marguerite's name with a shaking hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Wherever you are, thank you." That evening, after the day's visitors had departed and the lodge guests had retired to their rooms, Avis and Thora added to the journal they'd been keeping, a modern record to complement Marguerite's historical ledger. They documented each visit from descendants, each story shared, each connection made. The castle's story was still being written. "Do you ever think about them?" Thora asked as they sat in the library, the room warm with firelight. "Our biological mothers? Anne and Elizabeth?" "Every day," Avis admitted. "I think about who they might have been, what their lives would have looked like if they'd survived. But mostly, I think about how brave they were, running from dangerous men while pregnant, choosing their children's safety over their own. And I think about Claire and Josephine, Thora added. The choice they made to raise us as their own. They gave up any chance of being honest about who we were because they believed we were worth protecting. All 4 of them loved us, Avis said simply. In different ways, for different reasons, but they all chose us. That's the truth that matters. They'd visited the graves of Claire and Josephine several times since learning the full story, bringing flowers and talking to them the way daughters do to mothers they've lost. There were no graves for Anne and Elizabeth. They'd been buried under false names in the castle cemetery, markers that identified them only by initials and dates. Avis and Thora had arranged for new markers, simple but honest. Anne M., 1931-1951. Beloved Mother, and Elizabeth R., 1932-1951. Beloved Mother. A memorial plaque had been installed at the small cemetery. Here lie women who sought refuge and found peace. Their courage lives on in the children they protected and the lives they touched. The castle itself had become a living memorial. Yes, but it had also become exactly what they'd originally dreamed, a place of refuge and restoration. Hikers found rest there. Researchers found knowledge. Descendants found connection to their pasts. Women seeking information about domestic violence resources found contact information for the Foundation. The Second Wind Lodge had earned its name in ways they'd never imagined when they chose it. On a warm evening in late May, nearly a year after they'd opened the vault, Avis and Thora stood on the castle's front steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. A group of guests was having dinner inside, their laughter drifting out through open windows. Ruby's car was pulling up the drive. She was bringing supplies for the weekend's full house of visitors. We did it, Thora said. We actually did it. The lodge is running. The museum is thriving. The Foundation is helping people. We turned a crumbling castle into something meaningful. We honored the refuge, Avis corrected gently. That's what matters. Marguerite's work, Claire and Josephine's sacrifice, all those women's courage, it's not hidden anymore. It's celebrated. And we found out who we really are, Thora added. Sisters, survivors, daughters of women who fought for what was right. Guardians of their legacy, Avis agreed. Ruby joined them on the steps, carrying a box of fresh vegetables from her store. You two look contemplative, she said with a smile. Philosophical musings about life and destiny? Something like that, Avis replied. We were just thinking about how far we've come from that first day when we drove up here, thinking we were just buying an old building. You bought a calling, Ruby said. Sometimes that's how it works. You think you're making a practical decision, and then you discover you've stepped into exactly where you were meant to be. As twilight deepened into night, they went inside together, back to the work of running a lodge that was also a memorial, of providing refuge that was also a remembrance. The castle's windows glowed with warm light, a beacon in the mountains for anyone who needed to find their way home. In the library, the journals stood on their shelf, Marguerite's original ledger, now carefully preserved, and the new journal Avis and Thora were keeping. Two records of the same purpose, separated by decades but united in mission, document the courage, protect the vulnerable, preserve the truth. That night, after the guests had settled and the lodge was quiet, Avis and Thora made one final entry in their journal. Year 1 of Second Wind Lodge, we began as widows seeking a fresh start. We discovered we were sisters seeking our origins. We became guardians of a story that needed telling. We learned that some secrets are kept in love and revealed in trust. We honored women who came before us by continuing their work. We turned a forgotten castle into a remembered refuge. We found that the best second chances come when you're brave enough to look behind the walls and discover what's hidden there. May this place continue to offer refuge, restoration, and truth for all who need it. May the stories of courage continue to be told. May the legacy of love continue to guide us forward. They closed the journal and returned it to its place on the shelf, next to the ledger that had started everything. 2 records, 2 eras, 1 purpose. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and patient, keeping their own secrets, while the castle kept its promise, to be a refuge then, now, and always. A place where the past was honored and the present was purposeful. A place where two women who'd lost their husbands found not just friendship and a business, but family, identity, and calling, a place where every ending was also a beginning, where every secret revealed became a story celebrated, where every life touched by refuge became a testament to courage. Second Wind Lodge stood solid and welcoming, lights shining in the darkness, doors open to anyone seeking safety, restoration, or simply a place to rest before continuing their journey through the mountains and through life. The refuge endured. The stories were told. The truth was protected, and two sisters bound by blood they'd never known they shared, and by choices made before they were born, stood guard over a legacy that would outlive them all.